Let's take a closer look at these creationist arguments and break down the many flaws in their logic. As Creation.com writes, quote, "Mutations are accidental mistakes as the genetic information is copied from one generation to the next. Naturally, such scrambling of information will often be harmful. Thousands of hereditary diseases in people, for instance, are caused by just such inherited mutational defects." End quote. Hang on a sec, aren't you the creationist here? Aren't you the ones that believe that human beings were created by a perfect being? Why would he create such disease-prone creatures? If he's all-powerful and all-knowing, presumably he knew when he created humans that many of them would suffer and die from these genetic defects, so why would he move forward with this faulty creation plan? Presumably that means he's either indifferent to our suffering or he wants us to suffer in this way, with neither option being compatible with the idea of a loving, all-knowing, and all-powerful God. Quote, "The examples commonly cited, for example peppered moths and the Galapagos finches, are indeed examples of natural selection, but this is not evolution, since no new information has arisen." End quote. What the hell are these people talking about? They seem to be using this weird definition of evolution where evolution is defined as the creation of new genetic information. Not only is this simply not the definition of evolution, as anyone can learn by picking up a biology textbook, but it makes absolutely no sense as a definition of evolution. Mutation could create new genetic information that has zero impact on the phenotype or survival of the organism. Perhaps a few extra nucleotides get inserted into a strand of junk DNA, for example. Alternatively, as they point out in their own article, sometimes evolution takes place as a result of information decreasing in the genome. If, for example, a protein gets inactivated and that changes the organism's coat color. So defining evolution as the creation of new genetic material is completely nonsensical, even according to their own silly and unscientific article. Quote, "Given a pre-existing gene pool, different combinations of the genes arise through sexual reproduction, and some of those may be better able to survive. So natural selection can account for the formation of different varieties, but cannot account for the origin of moths or finches." End quote. First off, sexual reproduction is not the only mechanism of genetic variation. It's one of several, as anybody who knows anything about evolution will tell you. And how do they know that no new information has arisen? The only way they could say that with certainty would be if they performed before and after genetic comparisons. But given that the diversity of Galapagos finches is something that Darwin observed over 150 years ago, far before the advent of genetic sequencing, this is not something that they could possibly demonstrate. They could make this claim with some degree of confidence if they compared the genomes of these finches to show that no replication appears to have occurred and no new genes have apparently arisen. But clearly they've done none of these things. They're just assuming that they're correct. They're assuming that the evolution of these finches didn't involve new genetic information arising, even though it very well may have. Although this mindset might fly in your Sunday church service or during your visit to the Creation Museum, this is not how things work in science. You don't just blindly assume the truth of the claim that you're supposed to be proving. You collect evidence and run experiments to demonstrate the likely truth of that claim. Quote, "Natural selection can account for the formation of different varieties, but cannot account for the origin of moths or finches." End quote. Actually, it can do both. Gradual changes over time add up, until eventually two populations of the same species diverge from one another, to the point that they're no longer considered the same species. Creationists will concede that yes, small evolutionary changes do take place, but big ones don't. And I find this so strange because it's the exact same evolutionary process. It's just that small changes take place over short periods of time, whereas large changes take place over much longer periods of time. It'd be like saying, well, yeah, of course I believe in microtectonics, because we can measure small movements in tectonic plates every year. But do I believe in macrotectonics, that these plates can move huge distances over time? Absolutely not. I don't have enough faith to believe that. This kind of thinking is ludicrous because it's the same process. The only thing that's different is the timescale. Not only that, but there's abundant evidence that evolution creates new species. Observational evidence, fossil evidence, genetic evidence, biogeographical evidence, the list goes on. But never mind all of that evidence stuff. Creationists just prefer to bury their head in the sand. And ironically enough, if they do that for long enough, they might actually evolve into a new species. They write, quote, "Are there good mutations? Evolutionists can point to a small handful of cases in which a mutation has helped a creature to survive better than those without it." End quote. A small handful of cases? If you type into Google examples of evolutionary mutations, you find over 5 million results. There aren't just a few minor isolated examples. There are encyclopedias worth of examples. Read any biology textbook and you will just be inundated by example after example. This would be like saying, you can point to a small handful of cases where Nazis killed a Jew. There are a few isolated incidents where a person died of heart disease. You can point to a small handful of cases where a creationist made himself look foolish. There's also a general misconception in their logic that more visibly complex creatures necessarily require a larger genome. While this is true at a very broad level, with the genomes increasing in size from bacteria to algae to reptiles, past a certain point there is no correlation between genome size and the complexity of the organism. Many amphibians and flowering plants, for example, have a much larger genome than humans do, and yet most of us would argue that humans are a much more complex organism than toads or onions, although frankly I think some toads would give creationists a run for their money. So complexity isn't purely a matter of genome size, it's also the result of how these genes are used. Get the fuck out of here, you stupid fly. My genome is bigger than yours, so you can suck my dick. As we read in a monograph on metode.org, quote, "In prokaryotes, archaea, and bacteria, there is in general a linear relationship between genome size and the number of genes. However, in eukaryotes, there is no correlation between genome size and the complexity of the organism. This is known as the C-value paradox. The largest genome is found in an amoeba, a one-cell organism, with 686,000 megabase pairs, 200-fold larger than the human genome and 20,000-fold larger than the one found in yeast." End quote. So for many reasons, this anti-evolution creationist argument is extremely flawed. Contrary to what they argue, mutation and evolution actually can increase the amount of information in the genome, both through genetic duplication and through new genes arising from scratch. When they make this claim, they are making an outright falsehood, and this faulty argument presents no real challenge to the validity and truth of evolution. I'm on Patreon. There's a link in the description if you'd like to support my content. I would really appreciate it. There's also social media links in there if you want to follow me there. I'm trying to build up some of those followings. I would really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe for more videos if you haven't already. Hit the bell, hit the like button, post a fucking comments. All that fun stuff that's standard on YouTube. You know the fucking drill. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this.